Hello, everyone. Welcome again. Uh, I hope everyone can see and hear me clearly. But good evening. Welcome again to our four-part live series that we have been doing. This is a collaboration between Khush D.C. and Caribbean Equality Project. And Khush D.C. is so thankful for Caribbean Equality Project's platform, for their guidance and their direction as an organization, helping a sister organization here. So we are so excited to be doing this in partnership and as brown individuals showing solidarity to our Black friends. A little bit about Khush DC. Khush DC is a social support and political organization that provides a safe and supportive environment. It promotes awareness and acceptance and fosters positive cultural and sexual identity for lesbians, gays, bisexual, transgender, and questioning an additional gender or sexual minority South Asians in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. We represent a broad array of nationalities, including those of Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Iran, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. But not only these countries, but other diasporas that are spread across the globe that have South Asian ancestry. So I'm just one of the board members from Khush DC, and my name is Kevin Rodriguez. And I really want to thank Theo, who I will be inviting in now because of their partnership that all of this has been able to be realized. A little bit about Theo. Theo is a Jamaican-born resident of the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, an avid HIV/AIDS activist, passionate volunteer, and advisor for organizations and programs across the greater metropolitan area, which includes the Caribbean Equality Project. He has been advocating for safer sex practices throughout a diverse population, most recently narrowing his scope to the Caribbean LGBTQ community's use of PrEP and PEP. Theo is also responsible for ensuring that the word gets out about all that is happening for the Caribbean Equality Project, as well as curating the rich history that the organization writes each year. Theo's activism has included reaching out to and interacting with students and the youth populations through innovative ways, such as Project Red, which aimed to promote testing and becoming knowledgeable of one's status for all STDs and STIs. His advocacy work endures through an avid fight to represent a diverse population of people impacted by HIV/AIDS, particularly in the LGBTQ Caribbean diaspora. And with that, I invite Theo, who will be the moderator for tonight, in conversation with two of our esteemed guests, Ceyenne Doroshow and Darren J. Glenn. And with that, I take you guys' leave, and hopefully we will see Theo soon again.
All right. Kevin, thank you again for that wonderful introduction. We can't be more grateful. Here at TEP, we can't be more grateful for this partnership with Khush DC. And, just like Kevin said, I am Theo Brown. I'm the moderator for tonight. And I'm a member of Caribbean Equality Project, a member of the leadership team as well, the public relations officer. And we're New York City's only 501c3 organization that's avidly advocating for the Caribbean LGBTQ plus voices. And I just wanted to take some time to welcome you into this space. Of course, like Kevin said, this is the third part in a 4-part series that we're having for Black History Month, celebrating Black History Month through Black and Brown solidarity. So we just wanted to take some time to bring in, this week's theme, or our title for this week, and our theme is, of course, Black and Trans Equity, Caribbean Migration History, and HerStory. We're going to be having, the perspectives of from a trans Black woman from the Caribbean, as well as a queer Black man from the Caribbean, to bring some more focus into our narrative for this month as we continue to celebrate Black History Month. Of course, we're coming up on the end of February, but that does not mean that Black History Month ends here, right? We celebrate 365 strong. And just a real quick throwback to why we celebrate this month as a refresher based on, the conversations we've been having over the past 2 weeks. It's an observance of Black History Month. It's due to the small efforts of one American historian called Carter G. Woodson, aka the father of Black History Month. And, it was his belief that Black Americans knowing their history is essential for the advancement of Black people. Our past is our present, and we can't create a future path without knowing all that happened that led us to this current moment in time. And the historical erasure of marginalized people is how societies maintain systems of oppression. This is why a lot of LGBTQ plus historical figures either erased altogether from the narrative of Black history, and or we're just whitewashed altogether out of the history. And this is why this month and celebrating and creating this narrative and continuing the story is essential over the course of the year into the future. Now, with the creation of it's, I actually started as Black History Week, and it expanded into a whole month. Some years we get 28 days, some years we get 29. We're thankful for all the days that we get to celebrate and reminisce on the past and create a path to the future. And it's just a chance for us to celebrate Black excellence, as always. I wanted to just also take some time to, of course, thank everybody that brought us into this space. All the work that gets put into bringing us together. Thank Urban Equality Project, Khush D.C, and The World Is Rich Productions. Alrighty, and with that being said, I wanted to just, of course, take some time to intro our first speaker for tonight, which is going to be Ceyenne Doroshow, none other than Ceyenne Doroshow. So Ceyenne is a performer, an activist, an organizer, a community-based researcher, and public figure in the trans and sex worker rights movements. So Ceyenne herself, just simply a sex worker rights and trans activist and founder, of course, of Glitz Inc., and is also a CEP board member. Now, Ceyenne, as a founder and executive director of Glitz, she works to provide holistic care to LGBTQ plus sex workers while serving on 10 international boards, including SWAT Behind Bars and the NYU Law School. Also, as an international public speaker, her presentations include the Desiree Alliance and Creating Change, just a song, as well as working with the International AIDS conferences. Now, with that being said, I'm not going to spend much more time describing and discussing Ceyenne. I'm going to bring her into this space and welcome her into this space so that she can tell you a little bit about herself, by herself. So we would just want to take some time to welcome in Ceyenne into the space, whenever she's ready. And thank you all, everybody, for joining us today. Thank our audience.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello, glitzy and glamorous. How are you?
Hi.
Yeah.
I have. Oh God! Now I see you all.
You have arrived.
happy, staying alive, y'all, because we're staying alive.
Listen,
I am the founder and director of Glitz Inc. That's gays and lesbians living in a transgender society. I'm very happy to be here, alive, celebrating Black Trans History Month. I would say Black History Month, but we finally have arrived. So what else do you need me to know?
Well, I think that your intro serves, it speaks for itself. You speak for yourself. Your reputation precedes itself, right? And again, thank you for showing up with us tonight. You're looking fabulous, well-respected, well-rounded, and let's jump right into this chat. So
Okay.
First and foremost, I want to just ask you, Ceyenne, let's just take a deeper dive. We know all the accolades and, all the fancy titles and everything that makes us who we are, right? But let's go back a few paces. What brought you to the US? And, kind of how did you end up coming here as an immigrant from the Twin Island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, one, my grandparents lived in Park Slope. My grandfather's from Trinidad. My grandfather married a woman that was half Japanese. The Japanese side wanted no parts of the Trinidadian side. Mm-hmm. And literally, my grandparents both sides, never spoke to their parents or family again. They left their countries, they left their homes, and they built a home here in the US. And they vowed to never speak to these people. And it's kind of funny because my grandmother always went back on Sunday after church, right after church. She'd call home, she'd call a country and curse everybody out on Sunday and tell them how unprosperous they were and how rude they were and how nasty they were. My grandfather never said a word, never argued, never raised his voice, but he stayed fast in his pride as a Trinidad man to never go back. He was more behaved than my grandmother. She lived to call them on Sunday and tell them how broke they were and they're garbage for disrespecting them and shunning them.
Wow.
And I guess it hurt her till the day she died.
Wow.
She'll never, ever, well, she's gone now, but she never gave forgiveness for this. So it really hurt her. You know, being born in Brooklyn, raised in Park Slope, Bushwick and Park Slope, the conundrum as me being Black and trans and identifying from childhood. This wasn't an in-between where I knew I was a little boy that wanted to be a little girl. I was a little girl. I just knew I was a little girl. So I went right past start and went straight to go. And that's hard in the Caribbean diaspora. That's hard. You're trying to get your bearings and go to school. I was trying to kill myself and possibly, if not kill myself, run away. So those are the two things I thought would get me out of the pain of being rejected. And you know, I if I had to do it again, I think I would. I think I would.
Wow.
If I had to go through it all over again, all the pain and suffering, I'd do it again. So I could be where I am today, proud of who I am.
Exactly. I like how you make that point because, you know, oftentimes when we're coming up as queer people, as trans people, as gender non-conforming people, as all the titles that we get to become affiliated with, you know, with this pride flag behind me, if I can point to it very correctly, the pride flag behind me, you know, sometimes we say, oh my God, maybe if I was born not Black, or maybe if I was born in this country, maybe if I didn't have to be an immigrant, maybe things would have been different. But it's in, you know, having those experiences and coming up and being brought up the way we were, sometimes not so good, sometimes good, you know, it varies. We're here now. It helps to build our character and to strengthen us and to kind of push us forward into the, you know, to breathe right here in this very moment, having this chat, right? Building that character and, you know, kind of making us have that gumption and that, you know, chutzpah, you know, to get us where we are right now as persons, you know, in the LGBTQ plus community. I want to clarify something, Ceyenne, real quickly. So I know that, you know, people from TNT, you know, for those who don't know, Trinidad and Tobago, just like I stated in my question, is a twin island republic. Some people are very specific to let you know that they are, while they're from TNT, they're either from Trinidad or Tobago. Now, which do you claim both or one? Just a little by question.
We claim both.
Okay, you better represent all the identities and intersectionalities. I hear that. Yep. It's like asking the persons from St. Kitts and Nevis, do you claim St. Kitts or just Nevis? You understand what I'm saying? We want to represent everybody. And that's great. That's great. All righty. So I wanted to ask you now, so speak on your experience as a trans woman coming from Trinidad, you know, with the background that you just described. How has that experience helped to shape where you are presently?
It didn't really change. Thank you so much. It really didn't change me as far as my thoughts because the discrimination was so strong. My pride was stronger. I couldn't give a left wing about their feelings because I was an outcast. And being an outcast, you either learn how to step up and stand up, or you let all of it beat you up. I was never going to let it beat me up. I had always found a way to climb. Even in oppression, you have to find a way to dig out of it. I never felt like, and I always felt something better. So I knew in my transition and me being who I was, that same West Indian pride, the same Trinidadian pride, is the same pride I had for my gender identity. Just as faithful as they fly the flag, just as faithful as I flew my flag.
Right. I wanted to, and to add to that as well, I wanted to go back to something that you said, coming into this dialogue about, your grandmother and, some of the women, along your family line, that lineage that brought you to this moment as a woman now, as a trans woman from the Caribbean. Can you speak real quickly, how the feminine energy helped to create who you are right now? Probably I would say a spitfire. Every time we reference Cayenne to me, that's spicy, it's saucy, it's flavorful, it's everything that we want when we talk about Cayenne Doroshow. So how do the women help to?
My mom was and is a very fashionable, even in her senior years. She's a stylish, high pro kind of gal. My grandmother was the epitome of fashion and beauty. My aunts worked in Lord and Taylor's as head of shipment, which means we got all the good stuff. And what I seen in my mom was total disdain. But what I seen in my grandmother was tips, was little tips and gifts that I can take with me. When I first started dressing, my makeup was horrible. My makeup, I looked like I put the whole color palette on my eyes. And my grandmother would just sit at the table and shake her head. She'd just put down her head and shake her head. And one day she came with a little wipe and she said, "Why don't you take off some of the color?" And I said, "Grandma," and she said, "No, just take it off. We're gonna do this nice and natural." Well, I never thought my grandmother would actually say, and for a long time, I didn't know if she could see the colors, because in my head, she couldn't see it. But apparently she could see it, and she wanted to correct it. And she said, "The best way to be a young lady is not to be seen. To be that vision of beauty, but maybe you should take it down a notch." And I said, "Well, am I not?" She said, "It's not that you don't have the right to be who you are. I live in Park Slope. I prefer my neighbors to see a young lady." And I said, "Oh, I think she just read me." She did it in a very nice way, but what she was telling me, I would be more acceptable to her if I toned it down. That was a lesson. That was a lesson, because I think about how I seen other ladies out in the world in the street, and they would look at me with all the colors, and now I know what they was looking at, because my grandmother would often do that when I would come back in the house.
Right.
Lessons about how to hide my binky. I didn't even know that there was something that was supposed to happen. But she said, when you start putting on makeup, maybe you want to put that away. That's a lesson. I said, oh, she might have something there.
But to put that in context of persons who may not understand, when Cayenne references, her bingy, that's the kind of tuck, that you when you're doing drag, when you're going through that experience, you do a little tuck, to appear, of course, appear more, feminine, depending or masculine, depending on the transition that you're making, right?
Don't get me wrong. There are some women that identified with being women and not doing that, but my grandmother, it's a cultural thing, and it's more of a thing of respect in that time and age. So in that time and age, my grandmother was either you shit or get off the fence. Do not tote the line. Either you are or you're not. And her reasons were because she never wanted to, forgive me for using this word, she never wanted to bore a faggot.
Which I can definitely understand, because I know us coming from strong Caribbean backgrounds, it was a lot of respectability politics. It's just that, and I get it. The people from the past, the ones that helped to shape our narrative into us coming to this story right now. There is a lot of respectability politics. Oh, if you're gonna be gay, be gay. If you're gonna be queer, be queer. If you're gonna be lesbian, trans, be trans. There's none of this. Oh, you're gender non-conforming. There was none of that for them. They needed something clear cut, straightforward, and be like, listen, we need to put our blinders on. If you're gonna say come out as this, just be this. And we
still like that today. In the Caribbean diaspora, it's still like that today. Like, my mom is cool. She's learned a lot about gender identity. She's still not cool with them, they, us, and it breaks her up. And I mean, she tries to be respectful when my friends are around, but I know she's giggling deep in her brain. And she'll wait till everybody and leave and go, so what was that? But I'm glad we're in a place where she can hold it and she can go, what is that?
Instead of, and you're so right, because it's an evolution of the mind and the thought process as well, because we want to get to a place where we are, of course, our family members are not necessarily just comfortable, not only tolerating us, but fully accepting us and embracing us when we are around them and come into their space, right?
And don't get me wrong, there are still moments of them in question about our sexuality, even behind our backs, even though they act like they're here today. There's still those moments where one day I was looking at people talking about me, and I was looking at my mother's face, and it was a look of disdain. Well, sweetie, I'm all over the world. I'm in magazines. That look was a look I seen when I was first coming up.
Right.
And now. Right. And I asked about it, and she said, well, I'm still me. And yeah, I realized that at that point, I was like,
I totally get what you're saying, because in comparison to what you're saying, my mother still wanted me to, of course, get married to a woman and give her some grandchildren, even though she has. May she rest in peace. May she rest in peace. But she wanted me to get married to a woman and have several grandchildren. So totally get it.
Woman with breasts, and I did it.
Right.
Stay happy. Live in the moment.
I wanted to touch on something Ceyenne said as well, because just to plug Ceyenne again real quickly, Ceyenne is one of our featured honorees of Caribbean Equality Project's Queer Caribbeans of NYC exhibit. It's an ongoing process that we launched in 2019 in celebration of World Pride. So just so everybody knows, all of this, the fabulousness, we're not just honoring it, just like I said in the beginning, for 29 days of Black History Month. It's an ongoing process and procedure that, we keep it going for our queer Caribbean family. So that's a point of note right there. And of course, you can check out this exhibit, and a link to it is available at CaribbeanEqualityProject.org, right? Ceyenne, I want to go ahead and launch into this question. So I'm gonna literally say what I have to say word for word, and then we break it down from there. One of the constructs of white supremacy is constantly destructive violence against the Black skin. This construct has become a mainstay in various communities, as made evident in the sharp increase in violence against Black trans women, first and foremost, and men, of course, just trans bodies in general, but particularly women. We're seeing this violence just escalate, especially in recent years. Now, you were one of the speakers at last year's March for Black Trans Lives in Brooklyn, New York, and I want to remind folks of something. That march happened on June 14th, which is the birthday of the former disgraced, twice impeached occupant of the Oval Office. I always want to make a point of that, because that march, I think, was organized specifically as a middle finger to everything that was happening out of the Oval Office in the past 4 years, right? With an attempt to erase everything, all the progress that we have made from the books. So I just wanted to make that a point of note. But you were a speaker last year at the March for Black Trans Lives, and what do you make of this rise in violence? And what are some of the foreseeable, long-lasting effects on the Black trans community, especially the most vulnerable among us, which are Black trans women?
We are a vulnerable community. We've always been. When that man, Tangerine 45, signed a bill called Sesta and Foster, it took Black trans women, sex workers, people that have survived doing survival sex work, it took them from being able to not only take care of themselves, but it robbed them economically. It robbed them politically. It just robbed them. It robbed us all. But the same person that committed that crime was in the midst of committing the same crime. If you remember or think back to Stormy Daniels, Stormy Daniels was a sex worker, a high-paid whore that made money. She was an internet sensation. System forces to block sex work being promoted online. Where did 45 find Stormy Daniels? Sex work online. So the president was allowed to commit the first crime against us and sign a bill against us. Fast forward to the pandemic. You lock down a city and lock down places, and sex work and survival living still has to go on. When you're locking down cities and you start to see the numbers increase of people of color, of Black trans men and women of color being taken out, the numbers look very different from all over the world. When we see repeatedly on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, the bodies of Black trans women mainly being murdered, what was the government to say and what were they to do when they did nothing? When they had the Liberation March, what liberated us was our being before he even got in office. The liberation happened when we stepped up and we started giving people mutual aid, when we started participating in the politics of life, when we started burying other than our family, but our friends and our friends' friends, because that's what I did. That's what I'm sure a lot of us did. Step up and step out. But you look at the policies that protect us, we have none. We have none. This is why a liberation march was needed. Our true power cannot be taken away by a government. Our true power cannot be stomped out by a police or society. So that liberation march to me was about all my brothers and sisters and the elders and the young people and the kids. And it was about Layleen Polanco and everybody that have lost their lives to someone else's stupidity, shame, and discrimination. It's sad when our government will not protect the body of people. It's sad when our arrests of Latinx trans women in Jackson Heights lead to detention centers. That they're not just arresting them, they're putting them in detention centers. That immigration was going into our neighborhood here in Richmond Hills and Ozone Park, snatching parents out of their damn house. So yes, we needed to be liberated. We are living in liberation still today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I want to point out, you made some good points, Ceyenne, and I want to point out something as well that, that march happened, thank you for that point, Mohammed. 15,000 strong showed up to the Black Trans Liberation March. Thank you so much for that plug. And that's a good point because I was going to use that reference as well, that owing to the fact that this ongoing pandemic is just ravaging, ravaging our lives and making its rounds, right? And in conjunction with all the mismanagement that happened going into it, we didn't get to have a Pride last year. We had a fabulous, well, in terms of a physical Pride, I want to say it did move to the virtual environment, but we had a fabulous physical in-person World Pride in 2019, and then had to take a back pedal, kind of a back burner, back seat to having that physical hoopla that we usually do in 2020.
I had the hoopla at the Trans Liberation March. I got my full life. I was happy to see all the babies and all the elders, and happy to see trucks and people beeping their horns. We didn't need Pride. Pride is every day of the year, folks. We don't need white man's pride to have pride. We have pride.
Well, you see, and to that point, Ceyenne, Pride did start as a riot. It did start as a protest, as an outcry against injustice. So, this is what it means to have life come full circle, right? X amount, 51. Last year would have been 51 years. It's now 52 years this year. 51 years later, right? Shout out to, of course, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. May they rest well in power, right? So, but definitely, I definitely hear those points. And, it was, we saw the need for it. It was definitely a wake-up call that it happened post George Floyd. You know, these are names that we can't forget. And I say that, you know, I always big up the memory of
But you
George
want to know
Floyd,
something?
Breonna
I have
Taylor,
a problem.
Lainey Polanco.
I have a
Go
problem
ahead.
with that.
Go ahead.
Because before George Floyd died, at least 30, 40, 50, 100 trans women died. But
Yes.
George Floyd actually became a movement. So I do have a problem with that. They didn't say our names until they said his.
Because up until, you are absolutely right, because up until George Floyd's murder happened on Memorial Day, May 25th, 2020, and up until that point, by the time we got to May, by the time that it was getting hot outside to welcome summer, you know, just as you said just now, there were a number of Black trans women murdered on record. None of that mattered. Even though the pandemic was going on, most of us were observing lockdown procedures. None of that mattered until people saw what they saw with that video clip when white supremacy knelt on the neck of Black liberation and snuffed out a life in front of us. You know, that was the breaking point. So, you know, it's having the talks like this. It's bringing these things to the forefront that keeps these conversations and these activism going. Because what we wanted America to do, starting with New York City and then beyond the state of New York, America to do is to wake up from this comfortability of performative allyship. Oh yeah, we're gonna give CP some money. Yeah, Glitz, girl, we got you. We're gonna be at your ball and your and the function and you know the gathering, and we're gonna give you a few coins so you can continue this work, so you can, you know, help the trans girls out. And then you close your checkbook and you go home. That was a wake-up call for us to move beyond that moment. It's been long overdue, to say the least, right? And, you know, to move on to our next, you know, what we want to talk about next, I wanted to ask something real quickly. Among your many attributes, you're an author, the founder and executive director of Glitz Inc., right? How involved is your organization's work in the forward progression and upward mobility of the Black, trans, and LGBTQIA communities on a whole? So, of course, the trans community in specific,
Well,
and
I
then, you
start
know.
with TLBQIA. I start with the T first because I believe that.
Respectfully.
We are a leadership housing based on leadership. I am not for the faint of heart. Our application process is an application process of no type. I'm looking for leaders, people that already know how to do the work, people that are not in trouble, not in the streets, not running games, not flim-flamming. I'm looking to create doctors, lawyers, judges. I'm looking to create the best and be a part of that creation by giving scholarships. You can't just want to play somebody. You got to put somebody in school, but they got to be ready for it. This is not about the middle ground. There are many agencies. There's Marsha Peters and there's Sylvia Rivera and that. Let them people do their work. What Glitz is creating has never been done. This is about sustainability in housing, education, and survival, period. Anything else, I'm not waffling. I'm not one of those people that are going to play. This is not your design. I don't care about this one that's going through that. There are agencies for that. I'm not creating that. What I'm creating is something that has never been done. They're very right. I am a pioneer. I am a trailblazer because I trailblazed $1 million property to put our people in and get them to sustainability. That's the work. That's the only work I care about because that's creating another human being to do the work, to go to school, to become a caseworker, to become a doctor, to become a lawyer, and they be images of us, not them.
Good. I definitely hear the passion and the passion and the compassion, you know, about centering trans women and of course Black trans women, of course, you know, to elevate, you know, that community to the next level. And to, of course, for me as well, you know, we sit here on this live, you know, I have the CEP flag, which is intertwined with the Pride flag right behind me. You know, I have a trans one right here, on my, you know, in my area. You can't really see it right now, it's off camera.
I'm so glad you carry that one. I won't. I wear pink every day. That's it.
Here it is. No, but I wanted to say that it's about representation. That's one of the key tenets of CEP's work is about visibility and representation, and to show them that all Black lives matter, and Black trans lives matter. And the history that has brought us to this moment in time, that matters too, right? Because Black trans history is Black history is American history. And that's also important, a part of the narrative and the dialogue. As we are wrapping up this segment with you, Madam Doroshow, I wanted to ask you about the new administration that's in the Oval Office. We've moved past a nightmare of 4 years, compounded nightmare of 4 years. And
we really,
we're still trying, to move past it. And we're now in a new era, right? So the newly minted Biden-Harris Oval Office, right? That team has introduced their immigration plan, and it was introduced exactly a week ago today. One of the spearheading points of that bill, we have to introduce these things as bills before they can be signed, passed through Congress and then signed by president to become law, is a pathway to citizenship for some 12 million undocumented persons in this country. Clearly, we know that includes trans persons. We know that includes members of the LGBTQ population, and of course, Black trans women, right? Should this pass through Congress, what's your take on the prospects for our queer, trans, and gender non-conforming family members who are in serious need of this pathway to becoming a citizen?
I think we need to speak to the language of protection, and I definitely am optimistic with Biden. It's Harris that I'm worried about, when she has done a lot to Black men, period, in general, in our nation, in San Francisco, in California. She's not been so upstanding. So how is her seat being one of the people that are going to have control for Black trans women and community in our region? Well, I got to say, to be smart about this, there are two different kinds of visas that they're offering. I don't like the protocol to either one without some protections. And I think we need to rewrite policy, be working on policies, because I want to protect someone that's coming over or being protected under certain asylum, protected under rape or being trafficked, because we need language that protects us. If they're going to get this visa, I think it's a AU visa and a T visa.
A T visa. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you say that you were trafficked, are you now going to be free from having to tell that story, reliving that cycle? Or are they bringing you here to further use your story to help them fight for people? I want protection that looks like protection. I want policies set in place that specifically say, we're going to have a job. Try something new. We have a full scholarship for you to go to school so your life can change. I'm all for progression. I'm all for progression that has a point, that takes you to a point, that takes you to sustainability. Don't just bring me here. Sweetie, I'm going to need 40 acres and a mule for this work.
Well, and to that point, last point that you made, it's something that we're fighting for right now in conjunction with what you just mentioned and the potential passing of a comprehensive immigration overhaul bill. That's one of the things that we're looking towards too, is reparations. Because you have it seems like nowadays it's the year 2021, and it's like for a majority of us is either we can't agree to disagree on issues that will move us forward. One of the things I agree on is reparations as well, because that I do believe that after all the struggle and all the pain and all the torture that we've been put through, and our bodies have been put through, all the discrimination that we still face as members of the the LGBTQIA plus community, trans persons, gender non-conforming persons, I believe as Black persons specifically, let me state that I do believe that as one area that we need to emphasize going forward, that we definitely need some reparations as well. That needs to be something that's tried, not tried, I should say, that's put into place to to honor. That's another method that we could honor Black history through. And I see states, a southern state that I was very surprised at this last year, of North Carolina, because North Carolina has a history of somewhat similar to what happened in Tulsa and in Greenwood, in Rosewood in Florida. So Greenwood in Tulsa and Rosewood in Florida. So they're trying to work on reparations for that. So that's something that we definitely want to see happen, just as you mentioned, for our community as well, because it's not just a pathway to just get here and to be here. Oh yeah, I'm a U.S. citizen now, or I have my green card and everything. How are we going to create pathways for persons to have upward mobility, to work on financial education and liberation through that, to have legislation on the books, continue repealing things like the walking while trans man.
Legislation is the conversation. It needs to happen. Legislation and policy needs to have Black and queer and Caribbean people in the room, because we're being held out of these conversations. We need to be in their asses.
That's a pertinent point, because again, about representation and visibility, if we're not there in those spaces, just like Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, where it comes down to women belong in spaces where decisions are being made. So do Caribbean people, so do trans women are women, trans Black women are Black women. We belong in those spaces that decisions are being made to impact us.
This is how you protect us.
And this is Yeah, and it's one of those things where we can't have legislation just happening where there's nobody in the room that looks like us. That has nothing, that doesn't diversify the input and the opinions that goes into making these things eventually becoming law, right? So, Ceyenne, it's been a very spirited discussion. I want to say thank you again for coming on. I am always honored to have you in our presence here. It is a blessing, and we look forward to seeing your what else Glitz puts out, what else Ceyenne Doroshow puts out, and we're most definitely thanking you for being in this space. Alrighty, so you're quite welcome. We're gonna see you soon, and I bid thee well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. One more meeting to go.
I know you're a working girl. Keep it going, girl. Sisters doing it for themselves. You better work.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. I love you.
Good night, Ceyenne. Good night, my love. All righty. So next up, and moving right along. So we have, we're going to keep this conversation moving right along and going, in the direction of the positivity and the good vibes and the energy that we've built on in the past, few minutes of this conversation. We want to bring on Darren J. Glenn. Now, this gentleman is a Trinidadian-born American environmental and community organizer, currently serving as the program's director and ambassador to the Caribbean Equality Project. Born in San Juan, Trinidad and Tobago, Darren moved to the New York City metro area just at the tender age of 5 years old, and grew up mostly in Queens, and then in the Long Island area. His involvement in social advocacy began while he was enrolled at Binghamton University, where he became activated around issues related to Black liberation, LGBTQ+ rights, and immigrants' rights. Now, he began volunteer with us at CEP back in 2016. I know personally because I met him. It took a little kind of push and pull, tug of war to get into become a part of our leadership team. But I can absolutely say that since that addition to our leadership team, we have been better for that decision to bring him on and bring him into our fold. So, he's been a part of a lot of planning and executive decisions that we've made. And, outside of CEP, he's one of the biggest environmental advocates that we have ever met. And and he does this through social and economic projects through his nonprofit, the Glenn Family Foundation. So without further ado, we want to just bring on Darren J. Glenn into this space.
Hey, good evening, Theo. It is amazing always to see your face, and it's just such a pleasure to be a part of this wonderful evening and there's such a rich discussion, especially having the pleasure to follow someone like Ceyenne Doroshow, just a titan in the kind of work that we do.
Definitely. Thank you. Welcome into this space, audience. Again, this is Darren. I'm gonna allow him just to, of course, we're gonna move right into the his segment of this discussion. And Darren, I just want to ask you real quickly. So I know you're a true fan of history. One of the reasons that you were selected by the planning committee of this event, this 4-part series event, is your knowledge of your thirst for knowledge and your ability to convey that real, succinctly, right? So you're a true fan of history, of civilization. Any true fan of the history of civilization knows that Black history started long before the supremacist ships arrived on the West African shores in 1619. Right? I want you to speak on the topic of enslavement. how has this shaped the queer Caribbean experience throughout the years leading up to this point, this very point in our history? Did we always exist as queer Caribbeanites? Simply passing, perhaps, maybe. Did we? How did we show up here in today's day and age?
Absolutely, and that's a really beautiful question. It really speaks to like the formation of identity, which may seem like a very like academic topic that doesn't have anything to do with like the lived realities of people, but it's actually very pertinent to the oppression and the suffering that people face today. So I'm just going to kind of work backwards a little bit and just start by saying that just citing Foucault's kind of assertion that there's nothing essential about identity. Identity is formed as a part of like a continuing discourse between ourselves and other people. Queerness does not exist as an essential fact, right? It exists because there is compulsory cisness and compulsory heteronormativity. And because we are bound by this system that has forced us to behave in certain ways and forced us to do certain things with our bodies, regardless of whether or not we want to do them, queerness exists in contrary to that. So yeah, we have always existed having queer desire and having gender variance and gender expansiveness. This really beautiful, long tradition that we've had since way back when, time immemorial in Africa and other parts of the world that people have been brought to the Caribbean from. But this modern colonial gender system has really forced us to adopt these identities of like identifying as queer and identifying as Black, because it's always in opposition to the dominant identities, right? It's always in conversation and in reaction to difference. And so, yeah, we've always been here. We have been here. We are part of the human experience. But we have to we have to occupy these identities because there's a structure that tells us that we are wrong for being who we are. So yeah, that's kind of like the succinct way I would put the fact that like we've always really existed, but identifying as queer has been a new phenomenon in relationship to power and oppression.
Right. And definitely, one of the things, just real quickly, I want to just touch on this. There's a series called, Lovecraft Country that premiered last year. One of the scenes in it it really brought me back to the moment when I, realized who I was, right? And that moment that brought me to coming out. And it was a scene where there was actually like a drag show happening way back in the 1950s Chicago, prior to civil rights movement. I'm like, oh crap, we were everywhere, weren't we? Because for me, growing up in the Caribbean, it was, we all go through that process where you think you're the only one. Nobody else on earth exists but you. You're the only anomaly, right? You're the only one with a mistake, a missing screw or something, until you either leave your home country or get into some spaces that's more welcoming to persons like you. Like, oh yeah, we've been here, maybe not as highlighted as we'd have liked to, but one of the things, again, to speak to what you just said about learning American history, was meeting Mr. Bayard Rustin. I was just like, when I met him, I was just like, oh wait, you brazen, you were right here next to MLK. Fancy you.
I'm just not to cut across it, but that's such a beautiful point. Like Bayard Rustin kind of like exemplified for me the fact that the process of creating history, like spinning the narrative of history, how we remember events, how we remember people in the past, is also a political process. And we always miss that. We think that, we're led to believe that history is just a very neutral telling of events. But it's not. The process of how we remember the past is influenced by people's agendas and people's histories, and people's political interests. There's a reason why textbooks in Texas, I'm just going to leave that right there. The textbooks in Texas, when they talk about like the transatlantic the transatlantic slave trade, have a different narrative than textbooks in New York or textbooks in New Jersey. And so Bayard Rustin is just a beautiful example of the fact that like we've always been here. We've always been out proud and doing things and invested in the liberation and living our lives, and not just struggling, but just living. But like in the process of creating a historical narrative, there's an agenda to erase us.
Very much so, because you said it so beautifully. It's just like if I had not cracked open a book, because nobody really told me about him per se. It's from me doing some exploration. If I hadn't cracked open a book, the ones that weren't edited and whitewashed to erase not only the Black experience, but the Black queer LGBTQI whole rainbow experience, then a lot of that would have just been thrown out the window, and none of that would have existed right now. So we can be having this dialogue about, monumental figures from the past, like Mr. Rustin, and those are some good points. I wanted to touch on also, how did your, I read from your bio, you came to the States, you came into the whole NYC construct of the immigrant. We know this is NYC is like a bastion of Caribbean immigration destination. It's like, it has evolved. Clearly, it's the year 2021, so that has evolved. But traditionally, it was, if you didn't end up down south in Florida, right here in New York, or Connecticut, in specifically Hartford, and then up to Boston. It's just like, you weren't happening as an immigrant from the Caribbean. So how did your family end up specifically in this area, as against going to Idaho, randomly? Let's send y'all to Idaho.
Yeah, so it was like a result of what folks in like academia would call plant migration, right? So we had like history here. My grandfather, my mom's father, moved up here in like the late, very, very early 90s, and started working in South Queens for, I believe it was DHL. And if anyone knows anything about plant migration, it's just that, like, one relative will come and then send for the next relative and send for the next relative, and establish a community that way. So he came up here. He used to come up here all the time in the 80s. Had a lot of friends in Brooklyn. We did end up starting off in South Wilson Park. But that's kind of like how it ended up going. My parents came up here first, and then they sent for me. I came up here in 1993, right before my birthday. The idea really was just to come here, take advantage of the economic prosperity and just move back home.
Bounce back. Right. Yes, trust me. A lot of immigrants still have that kind of plan in mind. We have a lot of what we call, it's big in Jamaica to have a returning resident. So it's never something that really quells or goes away for certain people, especially when they're like, listen, we've had enough snow. And that's been one of my pet peeves about celebrating Black History Month in North America, especially up north. Well, yeah, North America in general, because look what happened in Texas last week, right? But and down south. But it's just that it's been one of my pet peeves where it just feels like some of the activities outdoors pre-pandemic, outdoor activities, they were cut short because of wintry weather. I'm just like, listen, Mr. Woodson, rest in peace. You were a giant in this movement, but for all the months that you could have chosen, you chose February. But
they have to just give us the month with the shortest amount of days too,
right? And again, that's the thing. It started out as a week, not even 7 days. 7 days to cram almost 400 years of enslavement, and then the prehistory of enslavement into 1 week. But yeah, that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, speak on your experience as a cis queer man, coming from Trinidad. How has this experience helped to shape where you are presently at this moment?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a beautiful question, because so many, it touches on so many like complicating factors, right? Like the fact that I am from the Caribbean community really shapes how how comfortable I feel walking, or especially growing up, how comfortable I felt walking into a queer identity, right? Like, the 90s, early 2000s, even to this day, the idea of being queer or gay is very much so something that's associated with whiteness. Of course, like, we are doing so much work, especially in the past few years, to break that assumption up. For the longest while, there was this very like tight binding between whiteness and the ability to be a part of the LGBTQ community. And so being when I started to kind of like discover that I was a queer person, you know, it really served as something to alienate me from my blackness and from my queerness, right? And I'm a proud Black man, very proud Trinidadian. You know, I mean, I have my flag here with me. But you know, I came to an understanding that like those two things cannot exist in the same body. Like when I'm in queer spaces, I really have to like really adopt a certain type of whiteness. Like, you know, I really had to just reject anything that would signify me as a Caribbean person, as a Black person, as a member of the Black community. I genuinely had that idea, and even when I met like other, you know, Black queer folk, I, you know, experienced them as being separate from Blackness. And so what really thrilled me about like finding organizations, you know, after college that specifically catered to Black LGBT folks, is that like there is a celebration of having one person embody both identities and redefining what it means to be Black and really like asserting the fact that Blackness has a multiplicity to it. That's just something that was just very new to me, and I don't think this is a challenge I would have had if I were American or white. You know, I think I would have just walked into queerness with a certain level of entitlement. But for me, it really was a journey. It was a very meandering journey to just discover that, like, I can define what Blackness is. I have, like, Blackness is not a monolithic, static idea. It is a conversation that I am a part of. And I love that. I celebrate that every day.
Right. Definitely hear those points. Those are some very resounding points, you know, because you and I share similar, you know, historical points in terms of, you know, our journey to get to this point. We're just born in different countries. We're, as they would say, we were just dropped off in different islands. We are all the same Black people, just dropped off in different islands and different territories. Yeah, and I'm glad I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something that has to be driven home in a 2021 world, that we're not monolithic, and for persons to understand, you know, what that word means, that we're not going to all, even if we identify as queer, as members of the community, you know, we're all family, as they would say, you know, we're not going to always all be the same. So, you know, what goes for the goose doesn't necessarily always go for the gander when it comes down to the Black experience, and especially the Black queer experience. And you know, which brings me to my next point, because we have a newly minted administration in the West Wing. So they introduced that immigration bill last week, you know, a week ago last week. And I know. It leaves much to be desired, you know, with the progress that's already being made. But just remember, it's only been about 36 days, I want to say, if we're keeping track, you know, so we have a few more days to go with that 100-day honeymoon period, even though there's not much of a honeymoon right now based on what needs to be done. But, you know, an immigration bill is being proposed. It's being brought to Congress. I wanted to ask you, with one of the points in the bill, it wants to address the root causes of migration, right? And it's specifically looking to Central America. But that's just one aspect, right? But it wants to address the root causes of migration, you know, in its effect. What, you know, how, if it becomes law, what's your take on how queer, trans, and gender non-conforming family members' lives could potentially be made better in the long run?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to start off by saying there's only so much policy can do. I mean, this is really for queer, trans, and non-gender conforming folks, gender non-conforming folks. It is equally a matter of policy, economic opportunity, and hearts and minds. Right? There's still like a climate of intense anti-LGBT sentiment that like drives people from their homes. So like, policy that addresses violence, addresses systemic violence, addresses economic instability and the lack of economic opportunity in Central America, the Caribbean, the Guianas. That's necessary. but it's not sufficient for people who exist at the margins of homophobia or transphobia and economic justice or lack of economic opportunity or violence. So this is absolutely necessary. There's only so much the U.S. government can do, which seems to be a novel concept for folks. But there's really only so much that the U.S. government can do, but it's very necessary for us to really start addressing those root causes, the structural causes that create the economic conditions that drive people from their home countries, and also address this like epidemic of organized gang violence that causes people to want to seek a better life. But it's not sufficient because, there are social factors that drive people from their homeland. So I remain optimistic because I believe that we are never beyond hope. And I'll repeat that for everybody. We are never beyond hope. As long as we're always working towards a better future, we are never beyond hope. So I'm very excited by this bill, but there's a role to be played by civil society, by nonprofit organizations, by churches, by other organizations that have the ability to influence hearts and minds. We need to have that happening as well.
Most definitely. And, I'm going to segue right into my next point because, I did mention that you're part of the Glenn Family Foundation. You helped to found that. You're also a part of the Caribbean Equality Project, as well as, other organizations that definitely align with your purpose, that you're discovering and, what you are very much interested in. What actions have your organization taken to improve the Black and Black, the Black experience and the Black queer experience in your community? I know you are involved. You became involved in a lot of what happened last year, with Caribbean Equality Project, doing a lot of community outreach. And I wanted you to speak to, how you're doing your part to help with the forward progression and the upward mobility of the Black and Brown, trans and LGBTQIA+ communities on a whole, both here and overseas.
Oh, absolutely. This is a really wonderful question. I mean, part of what drew me to nonprofit work is just the fact that you can't really count on the government all the time. I mean, when an administration changes from a progressive administration to conservative administration to a fascist administration, you never really know what you're going to get, and we hope that governments can do what they have to do and what they're contractually obligated to do for the sake of vulnerable people. But sometimes you just got to do it yourself, and that's why I'm drawn to nonprofit work. And really, I came to CEP in 2016 seeking a place where I can kind of mourn in community after the 2016 Pulse nightclub shooting that happened almost a year ago.
Right.
Around this time.
It's gonna be like maybe 5 years coming up in June this year.
Yeah. Right. And having a space that was culturally affirming, that also was a solemn space that really understood, that really honored the kind of collective trauma we were going through at the time. It was really just something that I was not going to find outside of a community-based organization. And seeing the other types of organizing work that Caribbean Equality Project does, I started to see the possibility that can happen when people come together and just do this work themselves. And so, the work that CEP does is really deeply inspired by radical Black imagination. We are imagining a future that we see very little evidence of in the present, because we must dream of a better future. And that's kind of the same spirit that I have with the Glenn Family Foundation, right? That in order to have a Caribbean of the future, our tagline is, we are working towards the Caribbean of the future. Just like CEP is trying to work towards a future in New York City where there is a total liberation of queer, gender nonconforming, trans Caribbean people, the Glenn Family Foundation is imagining a future um, in the Caribbean where vulnerable people are leading the green reconstruction, right? Like the Caribbean of the future is not a Caribbean that is wholly dependent on tourism or is constantly relying on the fossil fuel industry that's destroying our lands. That's not still entrenched in a lot of these tribalisms where like queer people are constantly being oppressed. My Caribbean future is something that is totally different than the Caribbean that we see right now, and I have the boldness to imagine that and to believe that it's possible because we're not beyond hope. There are ways in order to create that Caribbean Renaissance, that green reconstruction that needs to happen, and this is something that really excites me about the nonprofit sector, because if we were to rely on the speed of government, it wouldn't work.
Exactly. No, and I wanted to touch on something because I know I like what you said, because I know people here in America, people gang up on AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because because they're not in agreement with a lot of the progressive policies that she puts forward. But I like what you said, because you're literally, employing some of what she said and most of what you want to put forward for a better Trinidad, for a better, Caribbean community. Because I know last year's potential oil spill from that oil ship almost had you leaping out of your skin into next, beyond hope. So I know that you were having palpitations during that moment. And for me, it's very progressive and fantastic to actually hear us having a discussion about a Green New Deal that can involve, persons who are queer, persons who are part of the rainbow community, persons who want to actually participate in liberation. Because for me, liberation is it's a broad range topic as well that includes economics and financial stability to help us to sustain our work.
And just thinking about like how we define sustainable development, it's of course like I'm going to try to like paint the diagram for you, but it's like making sure that you're developing social equality, developing enhancing social life, enhancing the economy and access to economic prosperity, and making sure that your natural resources are not being depleted at the same time. That's what sustainable development is. You're not dipping into one in order to boost the other. Yeah, so depending on fossil fuels is not sustainable development. Chopping down all your trees is not sustainable development.
Never.
So, what I'm really focused on is making sure that that people who have been harmed the most in our original economy are the people who are leading the change to our new economy. And I'm just very excited about that kind of work, just because it's very complex. And people always ask, is it a social organization? Is it an economic organization? Is it an environmental organization? The answer is yes. So please,
it's all the above.
Right, just follow us on Instagram at Glenn Family Foundation, or on Twitter. We are launching that March 20th, but we have already started this work. Just launching this just for the folks at home.
Definitely. I want to take a minute real quickly just to speak to our audience directly. For the audience that are tuning in, of course, we thank you so much for coming into this space. Please post some questions for us that you'd want us to answer, because, Darren will be sticking around for just a few more minutes after we're finished with his final question in this segment to help fill some questions, whether it be about him, his foundation, or his work with the Caribbean Equality Project. So please don't be afraid to type in those questions. We're seeing you on Twitch, on YouTube, on Facebook, and of course on IG Live. So Darren, with as we're wrapping up this segment with you, I want to ask you something real quickly, because we've touched on your foundation's work. We have touched on some of the things in society that brought you to cross pathways with Caribbean Equality Project, right? One of those things, it's very, very trite, very cliche. People don't come into your life for any thing. They come for a reason and a season, and we definitely have you for a reason as a part of our organization. So what are some of the 2020 or 2021 problems that you think are heavily affecting or LGBTQIA plus Black communities, especially as seen through the lens of COVID-19? We were not going to wrap this up without touching on Ms. Rona.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh Lord, I'm gonna get this answer out as succinctly as possible. So there is a recovery happening, right? Like the government pumped a lot, the U.S. government pumped a lot of money into making sure that people were staying afloat, and making sure that businesses were able to accommodate workers and keep them on. But this recovery is what they call it a K-shaped recovery. So you're seeing a lot of people who are. I'm sorry, there's a coughing dog. Oh my God, die quietly, please. There's a coughing dog. There's a K-shaped recovery happening. So like there are people who are white collar workers, majority of whom are American born, majority of whom are white, middle class, upper class folks who are going to be doing fine. But the other side of the K are people who are never really going to like access this recovery. They're going to have to wait on the next recovery or the recovery after that, because that relief is not getting to them or the industries that they are participating in. So, people who are working more blue collar jobs, working class jobs, jobs that are dependent on an economy in which people can interact with each other physically. Those are the folks that are really like missing out on this recovery. So for me, the critical issue of 2021 and 2022, and honestly 2023, is going to make sure that like the unevenness of the recovery that we're going to go through is mitigated. So we need to have targeted programs, targeted aid in the private sector, the public sector, and everything in between, in order to make sure that the people who are most vulnerable and who are least able to access the general recovery that white collar workers are accessing are able to catch up. We need to have some sort of like affirmative action in our recovery, because this K-shaped recovery ain't it. Like
it ain't right.
The saying like a rising tide lifts all ships.
That trust me, with a capitalistic society, that has never really been the case in all shape and fashion and definition of that term. So, but definitely, I definitely want to thank you for those points, Darren. It's been a very, very intriguing discussion with you. I wanted to ask our audience again if there are any questions that that you have. I do see one here. Now, Richard would like to know, so for Darren, how does environmental racism affect Caribbean people, especially LGBTQ Caribbean people? And
Lord, how much time y'all got?
How much time you have, right? Listen. Richard, you ready?
So that's a really beautiful question, because environmental racism is just like a way for us to conceptualize the uneven ways in which people are all living at the edge of environmental disaster. The whole world is living at the edge of environmental disaster, of ecological disaster. Like all of the economic and social problems that we're facing are playing out against a backdrop in which we're having an unhinging climate, collapsing ecosystems, and a degrading natural world. However, our proximity to that disaster is different depending on who you are. So a lot of like migrants who come to this country are people of limited resources. And so they end up settling in what we call frontline or fence line communities that tend to be the least desirable places for people to settle. Why? Because they're next to corporate dumping grounds, environmental dumping grounds, or they're next to eroding shorelines or some other undesirable physical space that is much more susceptible to environmental disasters and is increasingly more susceptible to environmental disasters. As I mentioned before, we have this unhinging climate that's going to affect everybody. But specifically trying to focus on the unevenness within immigrant populations, LGBT Caribbean folks are still settling in Caribbean communities for the most part, in which there is a lot of like transphobia, homophobia, family rejection. And so even within these vulnerable communities that are existing in fence-line communities, they're less able to rely on family connections and the resources that the limited resources that do exist in their communities whenever there's a disaster, right? So if you're in a frontline community, a Caribbean community that is under-resourced, low income, that is constantly like in the path of some ecological disaster. But you still are unable to rely on the few resources circulating around that community because of, family rejection, homophobia, so on and so forth. And you're even more vulnerable to those disasters.
Right.
And I just want to like mention, because I just have such a passion for like what happens back home, that this dynamic is playing out in our home countries. When Bahamas was just completely obliterated, decimated by this apocalyptic tropical storm, it was queer people and people who are differently abled and economic migrants to the Bahamas that had to suffer the most, because they were least able to rely on what few resources were circulating around because of pre-existing social dynamics. So this is why it's not just about the economic aspects. It's not just about the fact that the climate is like, getting more and more unhinged, but it's also about the way social dynamics affect the way people are able to access the aid when there is a disaster.
Exactly. So Richard from Facebook, that was your answer right there in a nutshell. And, I thank you for tuning in. Now, from Facebook, again, we have a question from Jeffrey. How do we effectively engage non-Black Caribbean LGBTQ allies without taking away the power of the community?
Yeah, there are so many ways. You really want to, so we're speaking up for the community, but we're never speaking over them, right? We want to amplify the voices that are in that community. And I know that's difficult because like we are a very diverse community, we have, Afro-Caribbean folks that are from, Guyana or Grenada.
Trinidad.
Yeah, right. We have Indo-Caribbean folks. We have, our Chinese Caribbean community, our Indigenous Caribbean community, and particularly in Guyana. And so, like, when we're trying to amplify voices, we want to make sure that we're amplifying voices of all the complexity that's happening there. I don't ever want to see allies sacrifice the complexity in order to get a spotlight onto our community. We have to demonstrate the complexity of the community. We have to demonstrate the fact that, like, not every Afro-Trinidadian is going to agree on the best path forward or how to divide resources or so on and so forth. So just amplifying the complexity of the community is like the easiest thing that anybody can do in order to like make sure that you're engaging the community, that you're supporting the community, and you're showing up for the community in ways that are meaningful.
Exactly.
I would be remiss if I also didn't mention that, like, donating. I mean, we have a lot of organizations. I know sometimes it feels like we're being pulled in different directions, but there are so many opportunities to just donate resources, to donate your money to these organizations that are doing the work.
Exactly.
To represent us, to amplify these discussions, and also to provide this material aid. The most radical thing that, and to think that, like, I'm coming to this conclusion after like 32 years of being on this planet and being engaged in this work and doing scholarship. The most radical thing you can do, I'll save you guys all of that. I'll save you guys graduate degrees. I'll save you guys years of nonprofit work. Giving people money is one of the most radical acts of changing the world.
Right.
I wish someone had told me that like 10 years ago. Giving vulnerable people money is the most radical way to do that. And the best way to do that is to make sure that trusted organizations like the Caribbean Equality Project, and so many other organizations that I'm going to fail to name, but Caribbean Equality Project, Glitz, and other organizations that do mutual aid. Giving to those organizations so that they can disseminate it to the most vulnerable people is one of the most important things that allies can do. In addition to the complex conversations that we're having.
Most definitely, exactly, because the one of those things I wanted to just add to put a capstone on what Darren just said. Of course, the link to donate is right there, flashing on the bottom of your screen. So do pay attention to that. I'm going to be mentioning that in a few seconds again. Just to also, when you show up, when you're giving your money and donating, because just like Darren mentioned earlier, this rising tide floats all boats. When you come on to economics, has not worked. This pull yourselves up by the bootstraps has not worked for the person. And thank you, because I was going for that, the Reaganomics of trickle down effect. I was going to touch on that. Never has worked for people of color. Never has worked for immigrants, immigrants of color, Black people, immigrant, Hispanic people, and other BIPOC people. And it clearly, just as though we have just eloquently described, Darren, and discussed that, clearly doesn't trickle anywhere to the queer community. Many of which we're still in the process of bringing to the forefront through visibility in order to get the help and the assistance that we all need. So most definitely. If there are no more questions, I don't see any questions right there. Oh, well, we're great. Hold on. Here comes another one. We have another Facebook question. Didn't want Darren to leave. They're just like, stay. How does racism and anti-Blackness show up within Caribbean LGBTQ plus diaspora?
Oh, this is a beautiful question.
But like, how much time do we have? Hold on, let me set the timer.
It's a wonderful, because like this just touches on so many different things, right? Like the fact that like queerness is like cast in this image of whiteness, right? And that like assimilation to whiteness, particularly like in the 90s and before, is something that like someone had to trade off in order to be a part of the LGBTQ community. But also the fact that like the Caribbean diaspora is very diverse. I mean, we have Afro-Caribbean populations and Indo-Caribbean populations that have settled in the New York City area, but we have geographically divided ourselves, right? South Queens tends to have a lot of Indo-Caribbean folks, and Brooklyn tends to have more of the Afro-Caribbean folks. That is not an accident. It is.
That's by a construct. And I want to point out something real quickly. One of our Indo-Caribbean friends that actually lives in Queens pulled up a Google map earlier today. I was just like, wait, when did this little area of Queens become Little Guyana? I'm just like, as long as I've been in New York City, it's always been Little Guyana. Where were you? Just like if you live in South Florida, you have Little Haiti and Little Havana. It's just like, where were you? It's just like to add to your point, these are constructs that that when you have a migratory pattern that you're observing, you tend to come to certain areas until you branch off. It blew my mind that one of our members of CEP, which is an Indo-Caribbean cisgender man, lives in the Bronx. I'm just like, wait, how did you end up in the Bronx? You're supposed to be over there in Queens, sir. Please move. But it just shows the dynamics of the migratory pattern as well, and I'm glad you touched on those two different constructs as well, where you have the Afro-Caribbean, much like we are, and you have Indo-Caribbean persons that hail from islands like Trinidad and territories like Guyana, that they are, whether they immigrated into it or they brought it with them from their home country, is this sense that Black is wrong and anything Black is bad, and there's this negative attribute to it, especially when it comes down to dating and having relationships, right? Where you're looked down upon if you are, say for example, in the Caribbean dating an Afro-Caribbean person or interacting with an Afro-Caribbean person,
or
and these are some of the
or anybody who's Black, right?
Or anybody who's Black, right?
Yeah. You have Indo-Caribbean people dating African Americans from the continent, and that's like still also looked down upon, because there's that dynamics of racism that and anti-Blackness that have been perpetuated and stoked in the homeland, in Guyana, in Trinidad, in Jamaica, even, where like the genesis of this is, of course, like, the colonizer, right? Like, dividing and conquering was always a strategy from the time that indentured laborers from India were brought to the different Caribbean islands and Caribbean territories. And so like those dynamics continue to play out. And to the point where, like, the fascinating thing about white supremacy is that it's so complex and such a machine onto its own that you don't need white people present in order for it to manifest.
To manifest, because it's so deep rooted and it's a well constructed system. You hit the nail on the head.
And to really like hone in on this question, in the LGBTQ diaspora, because we have like geographically self-segregated, so that Afro-Caribbeans are in Brooklyn and Indo-Caribbeans are tend to be in Queens. We are and this, I'm speaking of the New York diaspora. I'm sure this plays out in South Florida and Toronto, in London, but specifically talking about New York, the queer communities that crop up within those diasporas tend to like be very insular, tend to be very like homogenous, like where you'll see like, you go to a bar in South Queens that caters to LGBT folks. It's very
very Indo. Yeah.
You go to a place in Brooklyn. It tends to be very Afro-Caribbean, and so those dynamics really do play out. And the one last thing I'll say about that is that, like, being part of a marginalized community for me is within the Caribbean diaspora is an opportunity to really break and rupture these patterns of segregation and hatred and really anti-Blackness. Because this is what I love about the Caribbean Equality Project, is that we're creating spaces that, like, acknowledge the existence and dignity of the inter-Caribbean community, but also making sure that it's a space that intentionally invites in deep solidarity and deep relationship with the Afro-Caribbean community, and making sure that, like, the tendency for self-segregation, which sometimes is valid, but we're trying to erode those patterns so that we can build our power and dismantle white supremacy together, because we're all victims of the same system.
Yeah, there you go. I think you said the last point very succinctly. I couldn't have said it better myself, because that's exactly, you took the words out of my mouth and out of my mind. So, I definitely wanted to thank you for those points. Like I said, Darren, we could go on forever on this topic, because just like I said, white supremacy, unchecked white privilege, things of that nature that has constructed racism and several branches of discrimination. It's so well constructed that it's now taking, for the 400 plus years of enslavement, it is now taking 400 plus years to break down those walls and dismantle it altogether. So, we could spend forever talking about this, but I wanted to thank you again for coming into this space and just dwelling with us and, getting some of these questions answered and having this, this dialogue going on where we can interact and, learn some more, through, while we celebrate Black History Month, through Black and Brown solidarity. So audience, just give it up for Darren and Ceyenne Doroshow. I just want to thank you all so much for coming into this space and for taking the time out tonight. Alrighty, folks. Alrighty. And that's going to be bringing us into the last segment of our show, a little aspect I like to call the media takeout specials. So, of course, just like we've been indicating all night, Black and Brown solidarity also looks like donating to organizations, contributing to organizations that are out here doing this work, such as Caribbean Equality Project. One way you can do this is of course by contributing to our 2021 COVID-19 Emergency Relief Fund. The graphics are right there on your screen. The links that we were flashing earlier, there you go, bright and beautiful. You can visit those websites, find us on social media. Wherever you find us on social media, you'll be able to, donate to our fundraising campaigns. How do we use funds like this to actually interact with community during community outreach, helping with things like food pantries, an ongoing effort that we definitely saw a need for last year in the throes and the uptick of everything that's been happening with the pandemic, right? So we launched a 2021 COVID-19 Emergency Relief Fund. It's now live. You can donate and contribute at any point in time, starting tonight. So please follow that link. And, for the media takeout specials, this is a brief rundown of different areas of arts, culture, science, etc., that can help with appreciating, understanding, and embracing more of Black and Black queer, trans, LGBTQ plus culture and history and HerStory. Moving your consciousness from simply, having just being a performative ally to actually doing the work to dismantle white supremacy, check white privilege, tackle anti-Blackness and anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric in its various forms, and of course, tackle racism effectively. So coming up on our next, slide right here, I want to point out the first media right here, Real Talk, Black Pain, I'm sorry. This is Black Pain. It just looks like we're not hurting. This book is by Terry Williams. For all the books that we've listed here, find them at fine booksellers across the country, especially Black-owned booksellers. Next up, we have Destruction of Black Civilization. Or actually, we can touch on that one, no problem. So, or Caribbean, this is a gathering of lesbian and gay writing from the Antilles. This is by Thomas Glave. Now, next up, in our treasure trove of media takeout specials, we have Destruction of Black Civilization. Oh, well, great. Here we go. We can use that one. No problem. So When Love Takes Over, it's the celebration of SGL, that's same gender loving couples of color. This is by Darren Aaron. And next up in our lineup of media takeout specials, we have Black Privilege. Opportunity comes to those who create it. This is by Charlemagne the God. We also referenced Charlemagne in weeks past when we discussed the Breakfast Club. That's also broadcasted via the Black Effect Podcast Network on iHeartRadio and wherever you receive podcasts. So you can pick up his book. This is actually one of two, his first being Black Privilege. Opportunity comes to those who create it. Next up on our list, we have, of course, how could we not acknowledge the work of Professor Ibram X. Kendi, right? How to be an anti-racist. Trust me, if you want to move far beyond that performative allyship, this is one of the tomes, those books that you need to pick up and need to have on hand. Read it from cover to cover, back and front, front to back, to make sure that you're understanding the work that it takes to break down and dismantle, racism in this society and worldwide. Up next, as we move right along, we have The Five Bloods. So this is one of the films that, of course, starred Chadwick Boseman. So rest in peace to Chadwick Boseman, of course. Five Bloods is only one. This is a Spike Lee joint. If anybody knows Spike Lee, he is a very creative and powerful force in the Black community and in Hollywood in general, So we wanted to uplift the Five Bloods. This was one of the last films that Chadwick Boseman was starring in before he passed away. And of course, Ma Rainey, all of these are either available on a streaming platform near you or available for purchase wherever you buy your books. And next up, I want to say last but not least, of course, Cooking in Heels. Why wouldn't we feature one of our guest speakers tonight? This book it's a memoir cookbook, Cooking in Heels, and it was done by none other than Ceyenne Doroshow. Please, it's another trip down through the journey of her life. And of course, she's a big cook. Of course, having the Caribbean influence is one of the things that we bring forth when we talk about Caribbean culture, is cooking and eating, right? And of course, it's a part of our Blackness. So pick up these media takeout specials anywhere like I said, books are sold, find book retailers nationwide, worldwide, wherever you're watching us from tonight. And, support our community. Continue to donate to Caribbean Equality Project. That's, website the tickers keep flashing across the screen. So please donate. Click donate, support us. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. Look for us at Caribbean Equality Project. On Twitter, you can find us at Carib Equality. And, just keep following us. For next week now, well, actually, Sunday. Sunday's next week, right? So we're going into the fourth part of our speaker series here for Black History Month, celebrating Black History Month through Black and Brown Solidarity, where we're going to be having the fabulous representation from the drag culture with Jalissa A. Ross. So that goes down Sunday, February 28th, 2021 at 7 p.m. sharp. Meet us right back here in this space. Don't be late. And, I'm looking forward to seeing you all there on Sunday. We're going to have another fabulous round of discussions as we end the 28 allotted days of February, but not end the discussion surrounding Black history and, queer Black history. So we want to thank you all tonight for tuning in. We're definitely appreciative of the time that you spent with us, and we're looking forward to seeing you again on Sunday. Follow us on social media and follow also at Khush D.C. They do a wonderful job of posting the media takeout specials so that you can, pick up a copy of those books, those watch those movies, and do what you got to do to become educated and stand liberated with us in this movement. So until next time, until Sunday, I'm Theo B, and happy Black History Month. It's been fun. Good night, everyone.